Welcome back to Heja Framtiden, the Swedish podcast on the future. My name is Christian von Essen and we're recording here today from Stockholm Creative Tech Week at Hasselbacken in Stockholm. Sitting here with Gareth Deakin. Welcome to the show.
Hello, it's nice to be here.
You flew in today from England. What have you been talking about here today?
Today we were talking about investing in creative arts and culture from an investment point of view, and tech and startups with a few other investors, members of the ecosystem from here in Stockholm, as opposed to me as a tourist.
So is this something you're passionate about?
Oh yeah, no, enormously. I've been for the best part of the last 10 years been working in certainly in music and early stage tech and creative startups. And ecosystems super important to that, and investment in those ecosystems is absolutely critical. So very passionate about the kind of spaces and kind of cultures that get built up around kind of fostering that early stage of innovation. Without it, it's just very hard for those companies to kind of thrive and for innovation to really drive things forwards.
So what do you see happening if we take music tech scene, for example? What areas are most interesting at the moment?
So, that's fascinating. I think the really interesting thing to have seen from my perspective, having changed, and I worked in the major label system for a long time, so I was in labels for 15 odd years before moving into sort of more tech and startup side of things. Everything was very focused previously on, what's the next distribution technology? What is you'd see startups stand up and I'm the next Spotify of this, or I'm the next iTunes of this, and et cetera. Being part of some of the incubators I'm part of, so I'm part of Abbey Road Red Studios has a startup incubator, I'm a part of that. And the early days, that was a lot of the pitches. And the big shift that's certainly changed has become, it's a much broader palette. I think, from the point of, there's more people from the industry building things to solve problems within the industry. The music industry is an industry that's typically opaque to people outside. It's complicated. There's rights and licensing things that are hard sometimes to figure out. But so fixing some real world problems. But then also it's become quite a diverse mix of technologies and people looking to solve real world problems. We have a lot of things that are quite hyped. So there's a lot of hype around the metaverse and NFTs and Web3, and some of that we may be too early on, but there's definitely some very exciting and interesting things happening there. But then we've also got things happening in terms of creativity and artificial intelligence, as well as things solving some of the systematic kind of problems that exist within the industry. How do we build more efficient outflows of capital to artists, etc. So it's exciting.
So how is London doing as a hub for this sector?
Yeah, I think London's good. The UK's always been a big export culture for music generally, so it has a big kind of music scene naturally, and then has had a lot of tech and other innovation kind of funding over the years. Fintech was a big thing in the UK, certain other strongholds. So I think good. I think, we haven't necessarily seen some of the really big, we definitely haven't got the London equivalent maybe of a Spotify at this point or something similar, but, artificial intelligence is very, very strong. Some of this ecosystem comes from universities and education. We have some very strong universities in some of those sectors. So, that's definitely driving things. So it's a healthy scene. Complicated by the fact that we're out of Europe, certainly from a music point of view. The ecosystem that supports, music is relatively small compared to something like fintech, right? A lot of the network that supports music tech and innovation is international by default because it's not so big. So the relationships between other people like me that are scattered across Europe and other territories around the world is kind of the backbone how a lot of these things sort of happen. So, that international bent, certainly around music and technology and innovation is super important.
And why do you think Stockholm is interesting from this point of view?
There's a very rich sort of tech scene here. I think culturally from a tech and innovation and startup scene, it's a very vibrant scene. I think, there's obviously been some big and successful tech platforms over the years, certainly some in entertainment that are very noticeable. I think also a very strong musical kind of heritage. Certainly when I think about from a music point of view, and I'm obviously biased, but a strong musical heritage. Bands that have kind of changed the world have come out of Sweden. And Stockholm, has a very rich heritage in kind of both. So I think that helps drive things. But it's clear, when we were talking in the panel, that, that to talk about education again, that starts in, kind of early in education and but also kind of like how you build culture that supports this type of innovation and type of approach to fostering kind of, people that want to take chances and push boundaries in terms of innovation and technology.
You mentioned that Web3 and NFTs and blockchain might be a bit early. We might be a bit in the early phase of that development. But do you see a future where creators can get easily direct access to their listeners, to the audiences, without going through the labels that, you come from? That's your background.
Yes. So qualifying the point about being early, I think there's a good chance. We've just gone through a huge boom hype cycle that largely was driven out of the US based on what originally started with ideas around how you change digital art and the distribution mechanisms in art, backed by everyone's social structures being taken away because of COVID and lockdown and various other things. So we've gone through an unprecedented time. So I think it's fair to say some of those things that we saw then won't ride out now as being kind of correct. But the thing I think is most interesting, and having been in music for as long as I have, there's been successive attempts to bring kind of the benefits of blockchain technologies into the music industry. We've just seen the largest adoption, retail adoption, so consumer adoption of blockchain technology that I've seen at this point, and that's super interesting. So I think now where we are is, regardless of, yes, some areas may be overhyped, maybe not everyone has found, or no one has really found product market fit at this point, but what we do have is a number of interesting use cases for this technology that are very different, whether those are royalty sharing kind of mechanisms, to the point you talked about actually where I'm very passionate is the idea that you talked about, which is the ability to use kind of tokenized assets and ownership in a very broad sense, not necessarily to financialize everything and make your fans rich, but as a way of building fan experience and value for fans and building fan clubs and various other things. That's super fascinating. So I think we've got this very broad mix of people building stuff, and people are building lots of interesting things on top of this technology. It's a very fertile creative ground. So I think that's a positive indicator. Do I think we're possibly too early? It really depends on what your expectation is for where you think it is right now. I think if you're an artist and you think if you do something in this space you're going to get rich quick and you can bypass the whole system, then we're too early, right? But I think in terms of where this space is at, I think actually it's a very exciting time.
Yeah, it's also an interesting co-creation aspect, I think, where an audience can invest in your work and your art and can actually develop it together and let it evolve in an interesting way.
Yeah, I think it makes you think very, very hard about how value is created for fans between the creator and someone who is a fan of that creator or that creator's output. That's interesting because I think that is one of the things that is possibly an interesting shift that keeps coming up. And you see it a little in some of the conversation around the metaverse and certain other things. We're possibly moving away from a model where value is only thought of in terms of distribution. So distribution, historically a lot of the music industry particularly is, based on the monetization is based purely on distribution. When you start thinking very hard about how an artist, a band, whoever it may be, creates value for a fan doesn't care about distribution. They do not care about all the people in between. They never cared about the trucks that took things to shops. They don't care about the digital pipes that takes things from A to B. They care about those artists, and they care about what that artist and that song means to them. And most of those things that build that value to them, many of them are totally intangible. It's the people they're with, what's going on in their life. It's all these other things that build value. And I think that gets interesting and gets exciting, because then you really do get into things that are much more experience economy based and something. When I think about what that sort of flattening of that curve looks like, or the distance between the historical rights owners and gatekeepers from an artist and a fan, kind of where that gap shrinks, I think of it more in those terms than I do in terms of replacing some bad actor, because actually I think most of the issues are systemic. Like I often say, I worked in a major label for 10 years. I never woke up one morning, and I never met anyone I think woke up in the morning and decided the thing they were going to do is try and screw over an artist. Right? People worked in those companies because they love the arts and they want to be part of that, and they want to be part of those bands' journeys, and they want to support them and all those things. I think those systemic problems kind of get solved, and I think we're in a world where it becomes interesting to think about how that works, and the co-creation part is super interesting because it challenges thoughts around ownership. Ownership isn't just owning a thing, right? It's like I own this thing because I was part of the experience. I helped co-create a thing, or I was part of with something with other people, and I've got the badge to prove it, etc.
Yeah, and there's an incentive in spreading the word.
Yeah, and I think, absolutely. I think that's what's one of the things that is truly interesting. The thing that got me interested in this space and working in it first in the Web3 kind of side of things was, there's a Venn diagram of kind of music fandom and the kind of baked-in community that comes with every, at that time, NFT project. We weren't really calling it Web3 at that point. And I think that's interesting, right? Like, I think, that human need for, experience and to be part of something, the ability then for community to be the people that bring in more people is very powerful from an artist point of view, and it's very powerful in terms of the the scale it brings. So I think that's a valuable thing within this technology. But then there's an imperative, because there's an agency crunches a lot of numbers in the music industry called Media, looking at some of the numbers they looked at, rough estimate 30 million music producers, people producing music at this point in time. By 2030 that gets to 100 million. We already have a system that we already know isn't, without crunching any numbers, paying out artists in a way that is sustainable. At 100 million, that's definitely not going to work. We do need to figure out how we're going to make that work, and it's pretty clear that fandom and the way people consume music is changing. It's fragmenting. There are more subgenres than there ever were before, etc., etc. So we do need a better infrastructure, and we do need to rethink how we think about creating value around artists and their works.
Great. I'm going to let you go now. Thank you, Gareth Deakin, for joining here from today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great.
We're recording here from Creative Tech Week in Stockholm 2022 at Hasselbacken. I'm Christian von Essen, and I'll be joining you next time with another topic. Thank you so much for listening.